Hey YouTube, how's it going? My name's Jonathan, and today I'm making another video about Hunter Avallone. So yeah, if you've been following this channel, you know that I just put out a video talking about Hunter leaving the right, and I feel kind of bad going after Hunter again so soon after just making a video about him, but just a day or two ago, Hunter put out another video and I was really like, I have to respond to this. Hunter's doing a new series with Young Americans for Liberty, and he just put out a new video called The Truth About Gun Control in 5 Minutes or Less. He gets a lot wrong. Now before I get into the details of this video and where I think Hunter gets so off, I want to get two things off the table first. The point of this video isn't to defend all gun control policies. The debate about gun control can be pretty nuanced, especially as it relates to gun ownership and the average person's safety, and when you throw in things like gun ownership rates and suicide, or domestic violence, or accidental injuries, you get statistics that come out and both sides think that they support their position. Second though, as much as I hate to admit it, I really don't want to keep going after Hunter, but I think his video really highlights something I said last time, which is that his understanding of a lot of conservative arguments can be very superficial. Now we'll get into exactly what I mean in just a second, but keep that in mind as we go through the video. I think Hunter had a very clear preconceived notion of what he wanted to talk about going into it, and he did a little bit of preliminary research, found a couple of quotes which he thought backed up his position, and then went ahead and shot the video. But I really want to dive deeper into Hunter's arguments here because he really isn't telling you the whole story, and it's really important to get the whole picture. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into it.
I'm Hunter Avallone, partnering with Young Americans for Liberty, and today we're going to be presenting some facts and debunking some myths about gun control. James Madison wrote the Second Amendment, which states, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." This amendment has largely separated America from the rest of the westernized world, making America internationally the highest in private gun ownership.
So good news, I think this is the only part of the video that Hunter actually gets completely right. America has always had a unique gun culture, and the premise of a militia being better for defense than a national army goes way back to the French and Indian War and then the battles of Lexington and Concord. Brief summary, in 1775 a group of 800 British soldiers marched out to Concord to try and destroy a bunch of arms and ammunition that the Patriots had. The Americans didn't have any kind of organized army at this point, so a group of 70 militiamen quickly grabbed their guns and stood up to the British forces. Even though the Americans were heavily outnumbered, as it turns out they were able to completely destroy the British forces through sniping and other guerrilla warfare techniques. Now I can probably guess what you're already thinking. If you're familiar with the Second Amendment debate at all, you'll know that the first clause of the amendment is one of the most contested lines in the entire US Constitution. As Hunter just said, the Second Amendment reads, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." Supporters of gun control argue that this first clause is key to understanding the purpose of the Second Amendment. Some would even say that the Second Amendment is entirely focused on militia ownership and doesn't concern individual rights to own firearms at all. Gun rights supporters would come back and say that at the time of the Revolution, the militia was just ordinary people, men and women who took out their arms to defend themselves against the world-renowned British army, so drawing a distinction between militia and ordinary people is being dishonest. Of course, my favourite approach might just be the NRAs, which leaves the first part of the Second Amendment out of its quotes entirely. While the debate about the militia is really important for understanding what the Second Amendment is all about though, I don't want to get into that too much here. I'll touch on it a couple more times as we keep watching his video, but that's not his primary focus, so I don't want to make it the primary focus of this video either.
The freedom to bear arms is what puts an additional check and balance on the government because it gives the people the ability to revolt.
Now that is where Hunter starts to go incredibly wrong, because what he just said in legal terms is known as the Insurrectionist Theory of the Second Amendment. Basically, the Insurrectionist Theory argues that the best check on government power is an armed population, and that the Second Amendment was written with this thought in mind. Some people have argued that the US constitutional structure and the freedom it provides are only possible when the government is forcefully restrained from becoming more tyrannical through people's individual firearm ownership. The long and short of the insurrectionist theory is the Second Amendment is a doomsday clause in the US Constitution, a last resort to protect Americans' right to rise up against a despot if there was no other option. Now this theory has a lot of problems, but the most obvious one is that it's just blatantly unconstitutional. If armed insurrection is the legally sanctioned enforcement mechanism for checks on the government's power, then there's a paradox in the Constitution. Because if you're talking about revolt as a justification for allowing people to keep guns, you're no longer talking about the rule of law. In fact, you're talking about a situation in which the Constitution is actually meaningless, because the same Constitution which grants to Congress the power to provide for calling forth the militia to suppress insurrections can't also allow that same militia to start them. Now, the Second Amendment doesn't say anything about a right to overthrow the government, but there are parts of the Constitution which are very clear about the government's power to protect itself from insurrection. For example, Article 3, Section 3 defines what treason is and gives Congress the power to decide what the punishment for treason should be. Article 4, Section 4 goes even further, requiring the federal government, at the request of a state, to come defend that state from domestic violence, which is exactly what any kind of armed revolt would involve. Now, while Hunter might view firearm ownership as the last safeguard against tyranny, guns have never been the primary enforcement mechanism for checks on the US government and preservations of liberty. The best way by which individual Americans can prevent would-be tyrants from assuming power is through elections, or in exceptional circumstances, impeachment. If you think about it, any government that allows firearm ownership isn't probably one that needs to be overthrown. But that's not a result of the firearm ownership, it's a result of the lack of conditions that make people want to pick up a gun against their leader.
As expected, we can see through history that the first order of authoritarian regimes is to disarm its citizens. Hitler, in fact, is a great example of this. Although gun laws did exist before Hitler's rise to power, his intentional disarmament of German Jews left them completely defenseless against the horrors they were to face.
Now, what Hunter just said is something that insurrectionist supporters bring up all the time, but it's a pretty misleading way of looking at what happened in Germany prior to the horrors of the Holocaust and World War II. First, and this goes back to my point from earlier, while referencing the Jews living in Hitler's Germany might serve as an example for why rebelling against a tyrannical leader can sometimes be justified, it's not a situation that describes a functioning constitutional system of government, or in this case, a situation where something like the Second Amendment would have any legal value at all. Hitler was a tyrant. Overthrowing a tyrant involves overthrowing the rules that brought them to power, and Hitler was democratically elected in 1932. Hitler's regime didn't originally gain control by confiscating people's guns, but by convincing a large segment of the German population that drastic actions were necessary to restore Germany as a world power. In the same way, if a tyrannical government rose to power in the US, it would only have gotten there by convincing people along the way that the policies it was trying to support down the road were worth the actions it was taking in the meantime. Now, when it comes to the specific gun control policies that Hunter is mentioning, describing them as just simply gun control is really misleading. Because first, as Hunter briefly says, the main restrictions on Germany's ability to own firearms originally came from the Weimar Republic, the government that was in power before Hitler's regime. In 1919, the Reichstag passed a bill that effectively banned all private firearm possession, and led to the government confiscating many guns that were already in circulation. In 1928, the government loosened its gun laws just a little bit, but put in place a strict permit system that forced people to get permits to own, sell, or carry a gun. Now, when the Nazi regime came to power, some of these regulations were actually loosened. In 1938, Hitler signed a bill which deregulated the acquisition and transfer of rifles, shotguns, and ammunition, and completely exempted certain categories of people from gun regulations altogether. He also lowered the legal purchase age from 20 to 18 and extended permits from 1 to 3 years. Now, it's true, Hitler's law did stop Jews and other persecuted classes from obtaining guns, but to call that gun control and a problem of gun control is kind of missing the point. It wasn't that Germans as a whole didn't own firearms, it was that the people that Hitler chose to persecute were already a marginalized minority group in society who had had all of their rights taken away. If we're going to call gun control bad because Hitler took guns away from Jews living in Germany, then as Alex Seitzold put it, we might as well call urban planning bad because Hitler forced Jews to live in horrible ghettos.
Lenin also saw the value of gun restrictions. The Bolshevik Revolution put an end to the free circulation of guns among the general public. The leaders of the uprising knew only too well what the masses were capable of, especially if armed up to the teeth, and moved to monopolize gun ownership. In 1918, the Bolsheviks initiated a large-scale confiscation of civilian firearms, outlawing their possession and threatening up to 10 years in prison for concealing a gun.
Bringing up the horrors of Stalin's communist regime doesn't really do anything to counter what I've already said. Stalin was a tyrant, yes. Once he was in power, he implemented gun restrictions, but he also used crackdowns on free speech, gulags, and political violence to secure his position. Arguing that all the Russian people needed to overthrow Stalin was guns is just silly. Stalin came to power after a 5-year bloody civil war. If he was going to be stopped, it would have been at that point. In addition, if you're seriously going to use Stalin and Hitler to defend the idea of an insurrectionist Second Amendment, you're going to have some hard questions to answer about what you think Americans should actually be allowed to own. Recent Supreme Court cases have discussed the constitutionality of bans on handguns and sawed-off shotguns, but those are really side issues compared to what you're suggesting. I mean, what's the basis for any regulations on individual firearm ownership at all, if the armed population is meant to be an effective check on government? A Second Amendment designed to protect the people from government tyranny should provide those people with weaponry that matches the government's own firepower, or else it's no protection at all. In fact, if you really think that the Second Amendment is designed to protect insurrection at all costs, the government should have less ability to regulate tanks and surface-to-air missiles than handguns and shotguns.
But what about the claim that gun control will prevent mass shootings and mass murder? Well, this once again comes down to individual liberty. As long as evil, ill-intending people have the ability to acquire a firearm or any other weapon through the black market or otherwise, you should be able to use the threat of lethal force for self-protection.
Now here Hunter brings up a whole new set of issues, but his point can really be boiled down to, if you ban guns, only the criminals will have guns, so more gun control equals bad. This is a really common cliche in the gun rights debate, but it's actually one of the very easiest to refute. In logic, there's a concept known as a tautology, where you basically say the same thing twice using different words. For example, if I were to say, my brother's team is expected to win their soccer game tomorrow because they're the better team, the two halves of the sentence say the exact same thing. Hunter's argument that gun control is bad because criminals will still get guns is another example of a tautology. Yes, criminals don't follow the law. That's why they're called criminals. But if you're seriously going to say that we shouldn't have gun laws at all because criminals won't follow them anyways, well, at that point, you're not making an argument for guns, you're making an argument against laws. RPGs are currently illegal in the United States, but it's probably possible to get one on the black market. Does that mean that we shouldn't have laws against people owning RPGs? Look, even if you think gun control as a whole is ineffective, I'll give you two concrete reasons why certain restrictions on gun ownership could make people safer. First, it forces criminals to internalize an additional cost to committing whatever violent crime they have in mind. Because now the act of buying an illegal weapon, or even buying a legal weapon in an illegal way, is a crime in and of itself. Now a criminal can be caught before they go out and try to shoot someone, as opposed to after they've already tried to commit the crime. Second, additional laws give people more recourse when they are the victim of a crime. To give an example, maybe someone can't prove they were actually shot at, but if they can prove that the criminal was using an illegal weapon, say an AK-47, they might be able to have additional recourse in court in like a civil or criminal trial that they wouldn't have had otherwise.
Benjamin Franklin famously said, "They who can give up essential liberty to obtain a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." While the limited studies suggest that temporarily deaths on a whole may decrease with stricter gun control, this is not accounting for the very real consequences of an unchecked government that we've seen time and time throughout history. As the government gets bigger and more powerful, the liberties that firearms were meant to protect will become free for the government to take. So in short, guns guarantee liberty.
Alright, I'm gonna say this one more time so it's perfectly clear. Guns are not the way we preserve liberty in America. We do that through elections. And I'm gonna bring up just one more argument why loosening gun laws can actually do the opposite of what you're suggesting. Let's just say we do live in a country where the Second Amendment guarantees people's right to rebel against tyrannical leaders. Well, tell me, Hunter, at that point, who defines what tyranny is? Let's go back through your YouTube history. About 7 months ago, you made a video called Why Anti-Vaxxers Must Be Stopped. Now, I can think of a lot of people who would think that the government forcing their children to get mandatory injections is the very definition of tyranny. If those people were to suddenly rise up and start shooting government agents to defend their liberty, would you really be on their side? A lot of times in American history, when people have attempted to form private militias, it hasn't exactly been great for liberty. Take the Supreme Court case Vietnamese Fishers Association versus Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. In that case, the KKK attempted to argue that its intimidation of Vietnamese fishers could not be regulated, since any court injunction against its military actions would run afoul of the Second Amendment. Now, I'm thankful that the court rejected the KKK's interpretation of this case and ruled that the formation of private armies is not protected under the Constitution, but if they had followed an insurrectionist theory of the Second Amendment, their hands would really have been tied. After all, any court restriction on the KKK's actions was probably viewed by the KKK as tyrannical. Now, Hunter had a lot of quotes in his video, so I'll wrap this video up with a quote of my own. Let's quote Abraham Lincoln. "It's safe to assert that no government proper ever had a provision in its organic law for its own termination." But yeah, thanks so much for watching this video. If you have anything to add, let me know in the comment section down below. I'm really interested to get your guys' opinions on this topic. Also, if you made it this far in the video, first off, thank you. I don't know if I would have even watched this far, but if you want to get notified about my new videos, it would mean the world to me if you subscribed and click the bell to get notified. I'm trying to make content as regularly as possible, and I really appreciate all of your guys' support. But anyways, that's it for this video, so I will see you next time.